Marines were about to face some of the hardest fighting of the entire Vietnam War. This was just 800 meters.
To make matters worse, the US High Command had banned the use of heavy artillery and airstrikes in Hue. This historic city was not to be destroyed. The Marines were on their own. Without this support and in the face of fierce opposition, progress was painfully slow. It took the Marines half a day just to get from here to there.
In Hue, the NVA were properly dug in everywhere. We couldn't go through any open space. We had to find a completely new way of fighting.
As the Marines in Hue were quickly discovering, it's a lot harder to retake a city than it is to defend it, especially if each house has been turned into a fortress.
February 3rd, 4 days into the Tet Offensive, the ban on supporting air attacks in the new city was finally lifted. With this air support and with their tanks, the Marines' progress started to speed up.
We tried our best to avoid malicious damage. As a result of their being so entrenched, it required for us to bring maximum firepower at our disposal to eliminate them. But we were fortunate that we did have the weapons that were capable of routing the NVA and the Viet Cong out of their positions.
Three days later, the Marines finally secured the local government building.
Are you finished? We want to get the hell out.
It had taken a week to advance just 800 meters. But in the citadel, over on the north side of the river, fighting had reached stalemate. And the North Vietnamese army had the South Vietnamese troops boxed in.
On February the 12th, the South Vietnamese sent the American Marines a call for help. The trouble was that the bridge connecting the new city with the Imperial Citadel had been blown up by the communists. The only way of getting over there was by river.
The only way to help the South Vietnamese and win the battle for Hue was for the Marines to get into the old city. This is where the boats picked up the Marines. Here it is on the map case, just here on the south side of the Perfume River. They were ferried up the river, round here, to the northeast corner of the citadel, where the South Vietnamese forces were trapped. Men and supplies were offloaded near one of the gates and rushed in to reinforce the South Vietnamese inside. The Marines now had to fight not just in the more densely packed streets of the citadel, but against an enemy protected by bunkers and battlements on walls several meters thick. The North Vietnamese were scattered throughout the city and heavily entrenched on the eastern side of the citadel and on the walls of the imperial palace itself. The South Vietnamese had tried but failed to push back their enemy. It was now up to the Marines. Their plan was to push south, down the narrow streets held by the North Vietnamese army, towards the Tong Tu Gate, where they had been ambushed 2 long weeks before.
Now the Marines found themselves in another unfamiliar battlefield, a gigantic fortress surrounded by high battlements and defensive moats. In fact, this citadel was such a unique landmark that, unlike in the new city, the South Vietnamese still wouldn't allow the Americans to bomb it. In some places, these historic walls are up to 100 feet thick. This new environment presented the Marines with some difficult choices. They could either stay down there in that tight warren of streets fighting house to house, or they could come up here onto the walls where there was far greater mobility, but they would be totally exposed.
How long do you think it's going to take you to get through this city?
Oh, we'll be here in a few weeks anyway, cleaning it out. It'll take a little while to get it out of here.
You lost any friends?
Quite a few. We lost one the other day. Good buddy. The whole thing stinks, really.
General Giap's men knew that for every day the communist flag flew over this sacred city, it sent out powerful propaganda messages to the Vietnamese people and, even more significantly, to America.
A week later, the communists were still holding out. This imperial palace was the source of intense frustration for the Marines. They were still forbidden from simply leveling the walls, and as a result, they were losing men fast.
You had this utter devastation all around you. You had this horrible smell. I mean, you just cannot describe the smell of death, especially when you're looking at it a couple of weeks along.
Then the Marines got some welcome news. The US airborne cavalry had managed to cut off their enemy's supply line into the old city here. And on top of this, the South Vietnamese had given permission for airstrikes on the citadel. As the Marines forced their way towards the southeast corner of the citadel, 2 A-4 jets dropped napalm to clear one area with devastating effect. Now able to use every weapon in their armory, the Marines in the citadel put all they had into breaking the hold of the North Vietnamese army on the imperial palace. Finally, to the south, around 150 Marine reinforcements stormed their way through to retake the Tong 2 gate, the gate that their comrades had been beaten back from 3 weeks earlier. After nearly a month of heavy fighting, the Imperial Palace was retaken and the city was back under South Vietnamese control. The battle for Hue was effectively over. Ho Chi Minh and General Giap's Tet Offensive had failed. They'd failed to prompt a general uprising of the people of South Vietnam. They'd failed to defeat the American and South Vietnamese in battle. Of all the 100 or so towns and cities they'd attacked, they hadn't held on to even one. And now the Viet Cong was effectively wiped out as a viable fighting force. Westmoreland had triumphed, or so he thought.
Throughout the weeks the Tet fighting had raged, the pictures of conflict flooded daily into American homes. And what the American public saw was a far uglier version of the war than they were expecting.
Rimming the edge of the courtyard, someone noticed small holes camouflaged. In almost every one, there's an enemy soldier.
Shocking images like these, and the summary execution of a prisoner by a South Vietnamese general, were broadcast on the evening news. All this was not what many Americans believed they should be fighting for.
But perhaps the final blow was that the television and newspaper images suggested that President Johnson and General Westmoreland had got it wrong. The Tet Offensive appeared to show the communists were a lot stronger than the American people had been told. The end of the war seemed even further off than ever. America's most respected television news anchorman, Walter Cronkite, was just back from a whirlwind tour of battlefields ravaged by Tet. He filed a pessimistic report that would strike a chord with millions.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
Something had to change. Johnson went live on television to announce a reduction in the bombing. To the surprise even of his closest colleagues, he ended his broadcast on a note of high political drama.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
The battle America's military claimed was a victory had turned into a political disaster. The Tet Offensive led to a huge shift in public opinion against the war and a change in government policy. The plan now was to strengthen and re-equip the South Vietnamese army in order to allow American troops to withdraw and South Vietnam to survive on its own. By 1973, all American ground troops had left. And in April 1975, the North Vietnamese took Saigon. The war was over. The country reunited. The communists in power.
Over 1 million Vietnamese people died during the Vietnam War. But the trauma did not end in 1975. When the communists took control, huge numbers of South Vietnamese fled, fearing the new regime. The country that they left behind had been virtually destroyed by one of the 20th century's longest wars.